I'm starting a series of videos on the new EaganMatrix overlays. This will be available when the new firmware is released, but I want to start early so that when it is released, we have all the necessary documentation and videos available so people who want to do this can have the information they need. I'm going to use a Mixtur-Trautonium emulation as the base overlay for the training tool. This uses two EaganMatrix modules and an Electra 1 EaganMatrix overlay. I used the Electra 1. You could use SynthEdit. You could go back to using Max MSP as the user overlay interface. Any one of a number of possibilities are available there. So let's just talk about what you have to do to design a synth that will be implemented with this new overlay interface. Dopefer came out a while ago with two modules, Eurorack modules, a subharmonic generator, and a Trautonium formant filter. These were used as the central components of creating a Mixtur-Trautonium using other modules and a ribbon controller as the user interface. If we take a little look at what they did here, on the oscillator side, there's a master oscillator that feeds a subharmonic oscillator to create your 4 subharmonic undertones. Then there's a side oscillator that can be detuned and a noise generator. That's the main oscillator component that's fed into this Trautonium formant filter that has 4 filters running in parallel that you can switch between bandpass and low pass, and the output of that is sent to an amplifier, VCA, and that's controlled with this ribbon controller. And then they have a Schlagwerk, which is an additional section that has envelope generation and LFO modulation possibilities. How might we model this with the EaganMatrix? We actually have a subharmonic generator preset in the system library that I created a while ago, but that has issues because we only have 6 macro controllers available right now for external control. To create a reasonable implementation of the Mixtur-Trautonium, we need a lot more than that, and that's where the new overlay interface comes in, because it exposes up to 90 controls now per preset and adds double the formulas, so you have a much greater design possibility now. Because the EaganMatrix only has 5 oscillator or filters, this implementation needs 4 oscillators and 4 filters to create something that's representative of the original. To do that, I used 2 EaganMatrix modules. The first module runs a preset that has all of the oscillator components and the subharmonic generator, the main oscillator, the side oscillator, and some noise components. And the output of that module, this is a nice thing about the EaganMatrix module, it takes direct audio input, so we can feed the output of module 1 into the inputs of module 2. Module 2 takes that audio and processes it through a Trautonium-like filter where we can add LFO components and effects processing. A Continue Mini is going to replace the ribbon controller, and as you'll see, we can also add Osmos and a Continuum into the mix as controllers as well. The Continue Mini in this case controls a Eviton Technologies UCVC. We only need 1 channel of WXYZCV control for this because the Trautonium is a monophonic instrument. Even though with overtones it will sound polyphonic. So we'll control the first module's WXYZ-CV inputs with the UCVC, and we'll molt those over. We'll copy those over to the second module's WXYZ-CV inputs because the second preset requires some control as well. The output of the second module is sent to the mixer or amplifier, whatever you like, and we'll turn off the effects processing of the first module because we want all the effects to be applied by the second module. Now the main component of this from the overlay interface will be our Electra 1 MIDI controller. That fortunately has 2 MIDI ports on it, so we'll program the Electra 1 to control the first module with port 1 output, and we'll control the second module with port 2 output. And there's quite a bit of programming that is required for this, but we'll go into that in a separate video. The system you can see is represented at the top right here. We need 2 presets that we'll create. One that will load on module 1 for oscillator control, and one that will load on module 2 for the filter, LFO, and effects processing. In this video, we won't go into any great detail on how to create these presets, but you can see how I've separated them into the basic components. Oscillator preset has the subharmonic generator section that's pulled from the subharmonic generator that's in the system presets now, modified a bit. We have a noise generator. We'll use noise from seed for this. We'll use 2 wave banks where we can control the waveform, triangle, square, or sawtooth. The original really used the sawtooth waveform. I'll modify that here, give some more options. This isn't trying to exactly replicate the Mixtur-Trautonium, but be representative of it and add a few nice new creative things in as well. So we have Wavebank 1, that's going to be our main oscillator, Wavebank 2, that'll be our side oscillator, and we'll add some detuning on that as in the original. Then we'll have some modulation control to add in some extra timbre possibilities by self-modulating the oscillators and also controlling the spectral balance, the timbre controls for each oscillator, and we'll even add some noise modulation through an envelope generator, an SG-based envelope generator, to add some additional components to the subharmonic oscillator. The output of all of that is going to be fed into the filter effects overlay preset. Audio comes into there. It can be sent out directly to some proportion if we like, but the main component of this is to feed the audio in parallel into these 4 filters that we can change either low pass or band pass. And then there's a lot of filter controls controlling the cutoff and the resonance, and we'll have some ability to control the filters, adding a sweep function. The output of that is sent into this new tan-H module that's in the newer firmware that provides some soft clipping functions. And we also feed the inputs into a some delay where we can create a dual tapped output with some feedback for some extra effects processing. We'll use the shape generator for the sweep control, and we'll also add a shape generator for LFO control, which we'll add as a tremolo option on the output. You can see we have a lot more formulas available now. When you create these overlays, it's going to be very important to track what all of your parameters are and what they do. So I always keep a table like this so that when I'm coding things up, I know what's going on. With 90 parameters per preset now, you can easily get lost when you're programming things. We're going to make things a little more complicated by throwing the Osmos and the Continuum into the mix by sending their MPE outputs into an iConnectivity Mio, which we can then route that MPE to the oscillator module and also send it into the editor using the editor's external interface so that I can send MPE in parallel into both modules. If I didn't want to use the editor, I could use a MIDI host with some MIDI merging, use some other ports on the Mio to do that. But it's important that I'm going to have control of both of the modules in parallel for this to work. Finally, we have our Electra 1 interface, and that we need to program because these overlays do not use just a standard MIDI CC interface, as we'll describe in future videos. All of these new macros are 14-bit in a special format that needs to be programmed because no MIDI controller is going to support that off the shelf. Now let's go into the Electra 1 overlay. We'll create a series of pages there for all the controls that we need. We can bring up that interface to show you in this case. Of course, this is just one possibility, as we said, using the Electra 1 as the user interface. You can program this up into any kind of a user interface that supports a sophisticated MIDI interface required to do the programming. So here's what the editor for the Electra 1 looks like. We'll have 6 or so pages available. The first one's the oscillator control. That will allow you to change the subharmonic from 1, the fundamental, down to 12. Remember, these are subharmonics, so as you increase the harmonic number, you're going to output a lower frequency. Each one of the subharmonic oscillators you can control the output level on. You can control that self-modulation for extra timbre control. You can control the spectral balance. And then I added this envelope-controlled noise input that we can trigger some noise components on the oscillator as well. This is separate from the noise output that you will see down here is an extra component. Then we have the main oscillator section. You'll be able to change the waveform on that from triangle to square to sawtooth. There are some octave doubling options on the oscillator I threw in because I could. And then there's the side oscillator, which has similar controls to the main oscillator, but that one also has a detuning function. Will allow you to change the oscillator type of the subharmonic oscillators from DSF to integrated DSF, and also allow 2 kinds of phase generator outputs. We have the noise output as we discussed, and then there's a couple controls for output gain. The output of this will feed into the filter module, and here's the page for that. We'll have 4 filters as discussed that will operate in parallel. You can change those from low pass to band pass. I allow you to change the filter cascading as well because that's an option that's available in the interface. For all intents and purposes, anything now you can do in the editor, you can do in one of these external overlays. The entire interface has been exposed that you have capability of programming. Each one of the filters, you can control the input level. I added a sweep option on the filters. And of course, then you can control the cutoff frequency and the resonance for each of the filters as well. There's a master input-output set of controls. You can change the filter mix input. You can change the audio input level. And then you can change the filter mix output and post gain. The tremolo controls are here that you can control the width and speed of your tremolo, your LFO. And then there's some extra controls for the sweep and the envelope control the filters. You can control the shape of that envelope. And I also add a master release on the sound that basically is a sustain component to an envelope. Then there's some sweep controls that will allow you to sweep all the frequencies in parallel to the same amount, or you can turn that off and set individual sweep frequencies that will be run in parallel. You can then set your sweep speed, and I also allow you to set a Y range of frequency sweep where you can manually impose a Y sweep if you like. Wow. Look at all these things that we can add here on this interface that were never possible before. Then there's the effects page. Here I can turn off the recirculator completely for the second module if I want to add external effects processing. I have my normal recirculator controls. This includes some additional options in the new firmware. I have my tilt controls that are added. Then I program the delay in there. There's the delay input control, the 2 tap percentages that can be set, feedback on the delay, and then you set the 2 tap output levels. I also added compressor controls. This actually in the new firmware can be switched between a compressor or a tan-H control. Since we already have tan-H control on the oscillator voices, I allow you the compressor option here. And then there are 4 convolutions that are going to be possible where you can control the mix of the convolution and the index. You can see a lot of these controls are very similar to what the editor gives you. Then there are some pedal controls and additional output controls. The main attenuation can be set for the module, pre-gain for the module, and some percentage of direct input sent to direct audio output can be set as well. Then we have a section where I've created a set of predefined configurations. So I don't have to set each of my oscillator subharmonic frequencies every time. I have preset configurations you can click, and for example here this will automatically set it to subharmonic 1, the fundamental, and then subharmonic 3, 7, and 10, for example. And I give you three options. One, it just sets the subharmonic oscillator. The other one sets the subharmonic oscillator and the main oscillator. And the third option of presets sets the subharmonic main and side oscillators, with possibly some detuning on the side oscillator. There's some extra presets that I'll be adding, and I'll add some way to save your presets back to the module. And finally, some additional controls that I added: surface direction, your mono modes split option, and some extra things. I'm thinking about also adding a Big Bank formant filter option, but not sure about that. As you can see, lots and lots of possibilities here. Then I have some special controls for testing. So that's the basic components of this preset, and now let's go and play it and see what it sounds like.